Okay. I'm going to go ahead and get started so we stay on track somewhat. So I'm here, I'm Sue Peterson, I'm from Chico State. I'm here to talk about the topic for LD, do a little topic discussion. So my goal in doing this topic discussion is not in the next 45 minutes to give you all of the possible arguments that could be argued on this topic, but to at least give you some guidance on what to expect. Because the hardest thing about debate for most people is the element of surprise, right? So you show up at your first tournament, you know what your affirmative is, and that's about it. So every round you're hearing new negative arguments that you didn't really know what to expect. You're hearing new affirmative arguments when you're on the negative that you didn't know what to expect. And hopefully this lecture, this discussion, will give you a better idea of what to expect. So you have a little bit more knowledge walking around, so it makes you feel a little bit more comfortable with that element of surprise. So the first thing that I do every season when I start, when I see that there's a new topic out is I read the topic and I start to define some terms because I think that's really important for reasons of topicality. Did you all just have the topicality discussion? Okay, good. So for reasons of topicality, I think it's good to start figuring out what will be the most likely things that are included in the topic, so affirmative arguments, and what will be some arguments that will be more on the negative side of things. What can we expect more on the negative side of things? But we can't do any of that until we know what the topic means. So did Steve talk about the topic at all within his topicality lecture?
Just a little bit.
Okay, so didn't define terms or anything like that?
Not really.
Okay, so let's go through, the topic is right there for you. Let's go through and talk about some of the different terms that we might want to define, and then we're going to do some Google searches and we're going to see what it says, and we're going to come up with a general idea of what we think the topic means. Okay, so what are some of the terms that you think need to be defined up there? Okay, increase. Okay, development. You're all good with the rest? You think everybody's going to agree on what the rest of the terms mean?
Oh, yeah, well, energy.
Energy, okay, so people will have may have different definitions of what the term energy means.
Fine minerals.
Okay. And there may be some discussion of what we mean by water. Especially because when you look at it, there's not necessarily any water that we would conceive of as water on the moon. So, okay, I am going to add in something that you all may not be familiar with because you're relatively new to debate, but I know that this is where a lot of this year's debate is going to focus. And it's something that you may not be expecting, but that term is going to be really, really important. Did you say that in the back?
I whispered it.
Okay, you gotta be willing to just vocalize those things, because that really is gonna be the crux of a lot of debates as the season goes on and people start to expand the number of arguments that they're making to be a little bit more strategic or a little bit more creative. It's going to be really important how you define that term is. Okay, but starting out, certainly I think all of these are areas where we'll want to have an idea of what they mean. So increase seems pretty straightforward, but why is there a debate that would take place on increase? Why is it important to have a clear definition of increase?
The quantity of increase.
Okay, so it could be quantity, there we go. Yeah.
Increase could imply that it already is happening.
Okay, so it could be,
I don't know how you read that one.
so there's a debate that takes place on the fact that if you're using the term increase, it has to be over something that already exists. Otherwise, you're creating something new. And those two terms mean different things. Okay. Anything else? On the other side of quantity, there's also what? How can you also increase something? Because what are you thinking of when you say quantity? What are some of the things that you might increase as far as its development of the Earth goes.
Increase just a little bit versus what are the limitations of increasing it?
Okay, so that's definitely what quantity means, but what I mean is quantity of what?
Funding?
Okay, so you could have funding,
Infrastructure.
you could have infrastructure,
Whatever product.
okay, you could have products, so like more minerals. All right, so I mean, we probably could go on and list a whole bunch of things, but it's important to recognize that quantity can focus on a lot of different things, but you have to increase the number of those things. That's what it means for quantity. Okay, so the number of dollars, or the number of structures, or the number of products that are being returned from the moon, it's the number focus that makes it quantity. But how else can you maybe increase development of the moon? Have we done any moon development? It's an important place to start.
Yes.
Okay, what kind of moon development do you know of? Do you know of any?
Well, okay, well, maybe not us, but, well, I think it is us. We have like that 3D printer in space right now.
Okay.
Like building those infrastructures.
Okay, so we've done, is that on the moon?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've done that. We've definitely had rovers on the moon before. We've definitely put people on the moon. Not for long periods of time, but they walked on the moon, unless you buy the fact that they were in a TV studio somewhere in Southern California. But I buy the fact that they walked on the moon, so we'll accept that fact. So there is a starting place, certainly. But what if you want to kind of have this idea of, must be in existence, so do I have to do more rovers? Because that's one of the only programs that we've actually done on the moon. Do I have to put more people on the moon? Because that's one of the things that we've done on the moon. Or can I, just say, well, we already have a moon program, so I'm going to increase that moon program by adding in a new program. Does that make sense? And that may be a quality argument. So right now we have a moon program, although it's not our focus right now, but historically we've gone to the moon, we've done things on the moon, but we haven't done a whole lot. So maybe that increase, instead of focusing on numbers of things that are already in existence, we can focus on the quality of those programs, increasing the quality of those programs. And that may also increase things like money and things like infrastructure, because we don't have a whole lot of infrastructure there right now. But that can help to get you out of this create debate. Because somebody could say, well, there's no, if you want to go and build a moon base, let's say, well, there's no moon base right now, so you're creating a new program. And you can say, well, no, actually, we've done moon exploration before, and that's the thing that's in existence. And we're increasing the quality of that by adding in this new element. Does that make sense how you would debate that? Okay? So you've got to have, on the affirmative, you always want to be thinking broader. And hopefully Steve talked about how on the negative you always want to be thinking narrower. So you want to try to be excluding stuff that the affirmative gets to do when you're on the negative. But for this discussion right now, we're talking about what are things that affirmative possibly could do. Okay? All right, so increase, definitely. And you wanted to, you can go and do a search online or find increase, and you can say become, that top one focuses on both, I think, quality and quantity, because it says you can make greater in size or amount, those would be quantitative, or intensity or degree, which would be more qualitative. Okay? And you can grow or make greater a program that exists. So yes, we've done moon development, it hasn't been very extensive yet, but anything that grows that moon program means that we are within the topic. Okay? All right, how about, I'm going to skip its right now, we'll come back to that. How about development? What are some conceptions you have of development? So let's go back to the context of the resolution, because you want to focus on the way it's being used in that sentence. Are we stumped?
Could be either expanding or refinement.
Okay, so expanding or refinement of the Earth's moon?
No, I was saying like development could mean like expanding like something we already have, whether it be quality, and then refinement would be kind of making it better in quality versus expanding it, like which increase kind of implies.
Okay, so when you say develop, let's go ahead and define development. Because sometimes what happens is we tend to focus on a word that is within the word. So this kind of defines it by using the same word, which I don't like. So you're focusing on the first definition here, the active process or growing or causing something to grow or become larger or more advanced. And that would be whatever we're doing on the moon as far as energy, minerals, or water is concerned, right? It could be the active process or process of creating something over a period of time. To increase development within that definition, what are some of the things that you could do? To create something over a period of time on the moon as far as development is concerned.
Put up a like mining camp or whatever.
Yeah, it would take a while to do that, right? There's a lot of steps that go into that, and a lot of people may say, well, you know, you don't get to do all those steps because that's effects topical. Did Steve talk about effects topicality? Okay, well, effects topicality says the first step that the plan takes has to be topical. And so a lot of people would say for moon mining, let's say, if you said we're going to set up a moon mining camp or we're going to establish a moon mining base, then they would say, well, you don't get to do that. You have to just go and do the mining underneath the topic. And I think development says, no, you get to actually create something over a period of time. So you get to do all those steps that lead up to the actual mining itself. You don't just have to go up there. It'd be impossible for anyone to do anything worthwhile if we force them their first step to be actually doing mining. Because we don't have anything up there to do mining right now, right? So you can't just force people to have that be their first step. So I think development in the topic, the reason that the word development is used is because it allows you to do these things that create new things, even though increase is in the topic. The fact that you're increasing development means that you're increasing the creation of these new things on the moon. Okay? Does that kind of make sense to everybody? So there's some ways that you can use development as far as defining it goes. But yeah, I think it's focus on process, focus on creating, focus on making things more advanced. Those are the types of definitions that you kind of want to be thinking about as you're thinking about what people could do on the topic. All right, how about energy? What do we mean by energy? You may got, yeah.
Something.
What's your name?
Casey.
Casey.
Yeah. Something that could be used to produce something else.
Okay, so something used to produce, something else. All right, what kind of energy do we use here on Earth right now? Electricity, nuclear, fossil fuels, wind. Did somebody say something?
I said cool.
Coal. Okay, so those are all types of energy. If we're focusing on the Earth, those are all types of energy that we use. So you could focus on a type of energy that you produce, certainly, or develop from the moon. Or you could focus on just producing something that helps you produce that energy. Okay? Because remember, development says you can create a process of doing something. You don't have to directly do that sometimes. So let's look at a definition of energy. Oops, should put it on there. So I would say number 2 is probably more applicable here in the context of our resolution. Power derived from the utilization of physical or chemical resources, especially to provide light and heat or work machines. Okay? I don't think that's the best definition, certainly, but it is a definition. Yeah, none of those are very good. How about if we type in energy and moon so that you're within the topic? What are some of the things the literature talks about? Now, this is more emotional energy. But somebody's going to argue that on this topic. Guaranteed. Somebody's going to argue that. So be ready for it. So this one talks about how the moon can give us clean energy. So that's probably going to be more within what we're traditionally thinking about. So we've got the moon's gravitational pull to spin generators in the ocean because of tidal energy. Okay. Some people might argue that you have to go to the moon to be topical on this particular topic, but I think that that is a way that people will argue without having to go to the moon, that they're using the moon's, developing the moon's energy. Helium-3 is something that's talked about in the literature. There is also solar power projects. How many of you have heard about solar power projects that relate to the moon? Anybody? Okay, there's solar power satellite projects. There's also solar, because of the way the moon's situated, it can collect a lot more solar energy than we can using solar panels here on Earth. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways, and a lot of these same things. There's a lot of different minerals on the Earth, but that could produce, could be used in producing power. So these two might be related to one another. But certainly you can talk about a lot of these same ideas on the moon as you can on the Earth. And it's whether you have to actually go to the moon to develop them or not to be topical is what we're going to discuss when we go back up to its. Okay? All right, so let's go back to the topic. What about minerals? What are minerals?
H3.
Say it again.
H3.
H.
Yeah, the helium-3.
Okay, so you could identify specific types of minerals. And I will say that there has been a rather extensive debate on our team about whether helium qualifies as a mineral or not. I'll just throw that out there. But
Thanks for that. Write that down.
Specific types of minerals, certainly, and there's a whole bunch of minerals on the moon that people have found. We've gone down and with our rovers, we've gone down and done core samples, so we pulled out samples of the moon's surface and collected data on that, and we know what's in there. So certainly specific types of minerals. But how do you define what's a mineral and what's not a mineral? Does anybody know?
Naturally occurring.
Okay, naturally occurring might be part of that. Let's define it. So a solid inorganic substance of natural occurrence, which is where our helium-3 discussion stems from. And you going down to the next definition, you see Pearl's reference to naturally occurring substance. So you've got naturally occurring substance, you've got solid, inorganic, representable by a chemical formula. So that's a little bit more extensive than just saying, a couple of words about it. Okay, so as you do research, once you come up with what your affirmative you want to run, so you come up with an affirmative idea, you want to make sure that you know how to define the terms so that your affirmative is topical. That's the most important thing. But certainly when you're talking about minerals, in a scientific sense, it would be naturally occurring substances that are solid, inorganic, representable by chemical formulas. Yeah?
Since it's minerals, do they have to have more than one? Or could that just be, they're just bringing back more than one rock?
I think more than one. I would say, most people would say just more than one rock.
Okay.
So there'd be more than one.
Not more than one type though.
Yeah, I don't think, most people will say that you have to have more than one type. Good question, though. Okay, how about water? There's a pretty simple definition of water, right? Yeah, it's this chemical composition, right? H2O defines water. Water takes a lot of different forms, though, right? So if we were to just do a definitional search, it's just going to come up with this colorless, transparent, odorless, tasteless liquid that forms these lakes. Stretch of area of water. We've got H2O, but if we say water and moon, so we see that on the moon it can't be liquid. All right, so our traditional notion of water is a little bit different. So there are believed to be, there's definitely been, I believe that we've already discovered ice, and it talks about the fact that they've conjectured that water ice could survive in cold, permanently shadowed craters in the moon. But there are definitely the chemicals in the moon's surface and atmosphere that we've discovered that could have water, could make up water.
I just don't really understand why somebody would want to go to the moon to harvest water.
Okay. Why might you do that? Does anybody know?
Rocket fuel.
Okay, it could be rocket fuel. It could also be for moon basing. It's difficult to have a moon base and not have access to water.
Okay, so you use it in conjecture with one of the other ones?
Yeah.
You wouldn't run that by itself, though?
No. So a lot of people, I think a lot of people's advantages will stem, move towards, a lot of people's advantages are going to move towards making it possible to have longer term space travel and moon basing. So in order to have those things, you have to have access to certain things on the moon's surface because it's too expensive to keep flying stuff up there. So I think that's how a lot of people are going to incorporate these things. It's not going to be that we bring them back to the Earth.
Like,
Yeah.
that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Same thing with energy. I think a lot of people are focused on how can we use the moon to produce energy that we'll use on Earth. But I think a lot of people will focus, how do we use the moon's energy in the moon's area on the moon's surface, in order to produce energy that we can then use to go out from the moon on space missions, moon basing on other areas, that kind of thing. Okay? So that will focus on advantage areas. So let's look at this term ITS. What do you think ITS means?
Ownership.
Okay, so ownership. I'm just gonna erase these so we have more room. So ownership, and in this context, it would be ownership of what by who?
USFG.
Okay, it would definitely be by the USFG.
Development, or development on the moon.
Their development of the Earth's moon. Their development of the Earth's moon in one or more of the following ways. So, ownership of development is the key term there. Okay? So when we talked about development, we talked about the processes of that. What does it mean to own those processes?
It's not private.
Okay, so good, yeah. Because there's a lot of arguments out there about why there should be privatization of space exploration and why we should have also partnerships between the government and private organizations. So if someone defines it as the ownership of development and it has to be purely governmental, that's going to restrict the number of things you can advocate. Because a lot of people who are advocating doing things are advocating them within the context of private exploration. So you're going to have to find advocates who say the government should do it. All right. Do you think there can be partnerships and it could still be ownership of development?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. What kind of partnerships do you know of or might happen?
SpaceX.
Say it again.
SpaceX, helping the government deliver resources to the ISS.
Is it SpaceX?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and that's delivering items. Okay. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. How many of you know about the recent contest that NASA's been sponsoring?
Project X, is that it?
I don't.
Or is that the other one?
I don't know, but I don't know what it's called actually. I just read about it. But NASA sponsors contests, and those contests are private individuals developing things that NASA needs, and then NASA gives them a big cash award. So it decreases the amount of money that NASA is spending on research and development. So right now there's actually a contest for a lunar mining rover or robot or whatever. And so NASA doesn't invest money in any of that research, but they end up with the actual item because they pay somebody for the idea. Okay? So those are types of partner. I would consider that to be a partnership as well, because it's a private organization or individual who's doing the work that NASA would have previously done. So I can't answer the question whether these are topical or aren't topical, but certainly people are going to argue that on this topic, I think. I think it's a little bit harder to just say, you know, private, totally private, because of this idea of ownership of development. The US federal government has to be involved in some way in order to increase its development. Okay? What about an affirmative that just funds? What if NASA just throws like $5 billion at some private company? Says go to the moon.
If NASA
That's
just
not-
sent it?
Well, NASA doesn't send anything. NASA just sends the money to some private organization.
That's
Well,
not topical.
yeah, that's all, because they're not using the USFG, they're using NASA.
Well, NASA's
They're
USFG.
not using the
Not
USFG to develop the moon.
Okay,
There's
so
another
that-
organization to develop.
Exactly. So that is the question that comes into play. How active does the USFG have to be in the process of development? Because remember, we focused on development being process. It is creating something or growing something. How active does the USFG have to be in that process in order to fall within the topic? And I think that's going to be a debate. I think people are going to try to get away with running affirmatives that are just NASA giving some private agency money and trying to go to the moon. And they still, you know, they're going to make the arguments that, look, we still link to your spending disads, we still link to all this, but it does take away quite a bit of ground when you think about the fact that now you don't get to run a private organization counterplan, right? They've stolen all that ground from you. Because really that should be a core debate on this topic. Should the US federal government do it, or should private organizations do this moon development? And that's going to be a big debate for a number of reasons that we're going to move into talking about now, because it has to do with affirmative and negative arguments. So what are some of the affirmative, now that we've talked about the topic a little bit more extensively, as far as defining terms, what are some of the affirmative arguments that you might think you might see on this topic? We've talked about some already, right?
And then develop a mining base.
Okay, mining base.
Outpost for long-term travel.
Okay.
Or really for anything.
Solar
Yeah,
energy.
could be for long-term living too. You'll probably hear this term a lot. Or this phrase. That there'll come a time when we have to get off the rock because the earth is going to hell in a handbasket. And so we're going to have someplace to go. So we need not only an outpost for taking off to go new places, but we need someplace to live.
On definitions, should you have to define the moon? Because it's not the moon, which is what, you know, the big one's called, and since Earth has other natural satellites that are technically classified as moons.
I don't think you have to do that if you're using the big moon that we would consider, that most people would consider, like the one we see in the night sky. If you are using one of those other natural satellites that you would define as a moon, then I think you need to put that in your 1AC so that everybody's on the same page as far as why you get to do that. And I think most people are going to say that that's not what we talk about. I think that's why the phrase is the Earth's moon. Is the kind of terms it as the grand notion of the Earth's moon, not necessarily just technical definitions. Does that make sense? Because I know what you're saying. Moon is like a scientific definition of something that revolves.
Yeah, the moon that we all know as the moon, it's the moon, not just the moon.
That is so capitalization, you mean?
No, it's actually like, if you type in the moon, you get the moon, but if you type in moon, then it'll say like, moons of Saturn, moons of whatever.
Oh, right. I think the before Earth's moon is considered all to be one phrase, if that makes sense. So, but there'll be people who try to do that, so you should be ready for that debate, and you can certainly try to do that, and you might get away with it in a few debates before people have answers to it.
Gosh, Casey.
All right, does somebody have a question over here or a comment? No?
Oh, no.
No? Okay, all right. What else?
Solar energy?
Okay, solar energy. And I would say solar energy collection is what most will focus on because we don't really have a means of doing that. But certainly there might be some arguments for solar energy disbursement. There's the whole like giant mirrors thing or whatever. But I think most people will focus on the collection of solar energy. And they'll have to have a method to get it back here, of course. But the mirrors are a little bit different than just having kind of satellite-based solar panels.
Well, I know that we were talking about for a resolution that says develop the Earth's, or the moon's resources, but it doesn't say anything about bringing them back to the Earth for use.
True. And that's why I think this is a big area that people will utilize. Because then you don't have to have those debates about, well, how are we going to get that back to the Earth? Well, we don't care whether we get it back to the Earth or not. We're planning on using it for long-term, space fuel, or we're planning on basing there, and so we need this stuff for that. You don't have to have a way to get it back. Now, if your argument is that you're going to provide energy in order to trade off with something like fossil fuels to stop climate change, then of course you're going to have a way to get it back here. But a lot of people won't focus on that.
Seems like it would hurt their impact, so.
Not getting it back to Earth?
Yeah.
Depends on what their impacts focus on. So if their impacts focus on space travel, doesn't hurt them at all. But if it focuses on, and in fact, if their argument is get off the rock, it probably helps their arguments because climate change is the whole reason we got to get off the rock. So we should start focusing. It's too late, right? A lot of people will just make the argument, look, it's too late. We've passed the tipping point on climate change. We can't change things here, but we got to find some place to go. Okay. All right, anything else? We talked about a few other things, right? Is anybody familiar with some of the things that appear in the Earth's soil?
Earth soil?
In the the moon's soil, sorry. So let's do lunar minerals.
You're talking about like dark matter?
No, nothing that big.
Okay.
Just kind of what minerals are in the moon's rocks that we could be able to use effectively. So let's see. I don't know what this is. How many of you are familiar with the term rare earth minerals, REMs? What do we use those for? Anybody know? Yeah, we use them in computers. They're basically the foundation of high tech. We use them in solar panels, computing, a whole bunch of different aspects of modern society have to have access to these what are called rare earth minerals. There's a number of different minerals that are included in that term. And there's a very limited supply of those on Earth. And even for those minerals that there's not a totally limited supply on Earth, some of them are very difficult to access. And that could be because of where they are in the world. So like China is sitting on a bunch of rare earth minerals in areas that they control, and they're not so willing to share those with others. They don't feel the importance of kind of like being good community members and saying, oh yeah, you need some for your solar panels, let's give them to you. So they make them really expensive, or they just set up like total trade tariffs on them and won't sell them. They are also sometimes in limited supply, so we know we're running out of them, and they don't reproduce themselves. All of them don't reproduce themselves, and so there's a limited supply of them, and as we advance in society, because they are so foundational in all these high-tech devices, as we advance in society, as we become more solar focused because of climate change and things like that, the need of these goes up and up and up. And so a lot of the discussion when talking about minerals on the moon has to focus on these rare earth elements, or rare earth minerals. So helium-3 is one of them. Thorium is another that you might hear about. Does anybody know what thorium gets used in? What? Are you referring to some movie?
Yes.
What does it get used in?
Yeah.
In the movie? Sometimes movies are based on reality.
Thunder.
Oh, probably not then. Oh, there's SpaceX appeared in this one. I wish I could just find a list of minerals. So, thorium gets used in some forms of nuclear energy. Some nuclear power plants use thorium. List of minerals on the moon. Let's do that. Oh. Why so high tech? All right, so there's aluminum, calcium, titanium, which is important, iron. There's also, which is not on here, is thorium and these rare earth minerals. How about we do a list of rare earth? Square, how am I square this? It's gonna be so much easier. Okay, so we've got magnesium, we've got aluminum, we've got thorium, we've got helium-3, we've got titanium. So there's a lot of different things that are used on Earth that we could mine there that are in limited supply here or controlled by countries that aren't too friendly towards us being able to access those. So I think that's going to be a big debate. Anything else that you can think of on the affirmative that people would say? Yeah.
I read somewhere that mining can create dust, so you could use the dust cloud as a
Oh,
blockage
interesting.
to solar radiation.
Okay, so mineral or mining, dust. Is that fair?
I guess.
All right. And then there'll be like what we call in debate the squirrel cases, the kind of crazy out there cases. We call those squirrels. So some other moon other than the big moon, right? That would be a squirrel case. There might be people who talk about that. There's going to be people, I think there's going to be people who talk about lunar tides, tidal energy from lunar tides. So the moon is what drives the tidal system, and we'll set up collection resources, and we'll use that and say that that is development of the Earth's, moon's energy, right? So I think there'll be those cases. So there's a number of different areas that people will talk about, and they'll talk about, they may just say thorium, or they may just say titanium, and they'll have a specific reason for mining for that specific mineral. So they could be as specific as that. All right, what about on the negative? What are some of the things that people will do on the negative or say on the negative? We've already talked about one gigantic area that I think is going to be key. Okay, well, no, but the affirmative has to say who should do this.
Oh, the
And what is the negative probably going to have arguments about?
privatization.
Yeah, there's going to be arguments on the negative about why this should all be done privately and not through the government. Okay, that could be a counterplan. That could also be a disadvantage. could be that right now, because in all honesty, right now the focus is on private development. There's a lot of private agencies or organizations that are going into space and kind of taking the lead on this. And the argument may be that you're going to trade off with that. The private is not going to see the returns on investment if they're competing with the US federal government. So they'll decrease their exploration in space, which could decrease innovation overall. That could be a disadvantage. Or you could just say, we think your idea is a great idea, but we just think private organizations should do it, not the US federal government. Okay? What else might you hear?
Asteroid mining.
Okay. What would be negative about that? I mean, how would that appear? What kind of argument?
Counterpoint.
Yeah. So instead of going to the moon, we've already got plans for this, right? That was Obama's big push, is that we should figure out a way to land on asteroids and mine from them. A lot of the rare earth minerals come from meteorites hitting the Earth or the moon, and so why not just go straight to the source? Instead of waiting for them to run into something, we'll just go straight to the source and mine them. So yeah, I think that'll be a big counter plan for mining affirmatives. What else? What kind of disads? What do you have to do in order to do this stuff? What's going to be the top disad? What?
Funding?
Yeah, there's going to be big spending disads. Because this costs a lot of money. And right now the federal government, not in that great a shape. Our economy is not in that great a shape. So a lot of people are going to question, is this really where we want to be investing our public dollars, our tax dollars? All right, what else?
International Space Treaty.
Okay, yes, definitely. And what does that say, do you know?
No one country can claim space as their own.
Yeah, well, and there's actually a moon treaty specifically. But yeah, there's these international treaties that we signed on to kind of a long time ago. And because there hasn't been that much exploration where people have actually landed on or tried to base for space planets and the moon and stuff, there hasn't been really that much follow-up on these things. And so the moon treaty actually said that it's debatable about whether this is as straightforward as it seems, but it says that you can't provide property rights on the moon. So like if nobody can own the moon, if nobody can kind of call it their own, then we can't provide property rights to private organizations who go up there and establish moon bases. We can't guarantee them that China's not going to come in and say, hey, that's our space, right? So yeah, there'll be a lot of international talk about whether we can do any of these things. I think it's going to come in the form of both disads and counterplans, and there'll be a lot of international relations arguments, even outside of the space treaty, because right now China's kind of taking the lead on this. So as soon as we step in and try to start, how many of you heard of the space race? Who was that with in the 1960s? Russia. And that was a way of us establishing prominence, right? To prove that we could do something before Russia could. And so that was a way of us introducing international dominance over Russia. China's probably going to view it the same way when all of a sudden we have a big interest in doing the space mission that they've been focused on for the last decade or so, which is the moon. So we kind of said, oh, we're not really interested in the moon. We'll focus on Mars, we'll focus on asteroids, we'll do this stuff. And it's been publicly stated by our politicians that the moon is not where we're going. But now all of a sudden we change gears and we say, oh, you know what? We're really interested in the moon, China. Probably not going to be really happy about that. So there'll be some international relations implications to that. Anything else that you can think of on the negative? I mean, I think there's going to be arguments about Earth development trade-offs, right? That we can do things on Earth a lot easier, we're already here, and we should really focus our efforts on this quicker, better way of establishing more energy or more minerals or things like that, rather than spending all this money going up to the moon when we don't even know whether it's going to work or not. And that our funding is going to trade off with that, because we have limited amounts of funds. I also think there's going to be some arguments about The development mindset. How many of you are familiar with that?
Is that the same as like a conquest mindset?
Yeah, kind of. It says, you know, look at what we've done to the earth. We've done this to the earth because we just view it as kind of a place where we take things from and don't give back. And so now we're running out of things like minerals and energy and things like that on the earth. We've destroyed the earth basically. So now we're just going to run somewhere new and develop that in the same exact mindset that we've developed everything else, which means that we're just basically taking that destructive mindset and putting it on another object. Okay, and so we're not extending life at all because, I mean, we are extending life, but we're not changing it so that it's more sustainable. We're actually doing the reverse of that. Because if we can just keep running to other places to fix our sustainability problems, then there's no reason for us to become more sustainable on Earth, right? Yeah.
It's like the, I don't know if it's a counterpoint or just like the clean slate thing that a lot of people run, like, Earth's like people of Earth are an abomination, so going into space is actually the worst case scenario.
Yes. Yeah.
We shouldn't do that.
Yeah. And you know, some people, if they're your deep eco philosophers, will say that we should do away with humans because we're the problem. Yeah. So extending life of humans by going to the moon is actually a really bad idea. Yeah, definitely. So hopefully, I mean, obviously, like I said, I can't cover everything in 45 minutes that's going to be on this topic, but hopefully this has maybe made you think about some things that you hadn't previously thought of. And as you're doing your research, you want to think strategically about the way that you're defining things so that your affirmative, you can explain how it's topical, and that you get some strategic benefits that will deal with some of these negative arguments. So how are you going to deal with the spending disad? How are you going to deal with the asteroid mining counterplan if you have a mining affirmative? And those are all things that you can kind of think of so that it's not so much that total surprise factor when you get to your first tournament. Because if you all thought of it in this room, I guarantee you, even people who aren't here on other teams are thinking of these same things. And this is going to be a lot of what you hear at the first tournament. Okay? All right, before you all go, I'm going to pass out, so we made evidence packets for you all. There is one NC packet that everybody, did you already, you just got the one NC. Oh, that's easy.
That was in the last session.
Oh, okay. All right, so there's a 1NC packet and then there's a 1AC packet. So there's an affirmative case and there's negative arguments against that affirmative case as well as a disadvantage and a counter plan. And for those of you who are going to be debating this afternoon, this is the evidence packet that you'll be using. So you can start reading over it at lunch and kind of figure out how you're going to utilize some of this evidence. And you'll notice that there are some of the arguments that we talked about today in these packets. So.
If we do the other debate, are we allowed to bring out our own argument? Like if we have other stuff besides this, or do we stick strictly to this?
You should stick strictly to this, although at least evidentiarily speaking, because other people won't have access to kind of your evidence ahead of time, I guess. And because people are so new, we're combining rookie and novice, so there'll be a lot of people who have never seen a debate before who you might debate against. So don't pull out like brand new stuff and be like, ha-ha, you know, because they'll be like, oh crap, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing right now, and now there's this new argument. But I think that you can, if you're debating against a more experienced person and you ask them ahead of time, I think that's fine.
Okay. I mean, I don't
Some people may want practice with that because that's the way the first tournament's going to be.
Yeah.
Is people are just going to be pulling out stuff. So I think some people will be perfectly happy to do that. But if you're debating somebody who says, I've never debated before, I would say don't do that.
Okay.
All right.
Disadvantage.
Oh, thanks. Everybody got an affirmative and a negative packet?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Wait, are these all?
No, one and see.
Oh, well, do we all have